Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about my favorite releases of the last 3 months, the third quarter of 2025. So before I even get into that, there's three particular books I want to discuss that will not be appearing on this list, even though they dropped and I have very high expectations for them. Number one is Brandon Sanderson's Isles of the Dark. I did not back the Kickstarter or whatever you were supposed to back to get it, so I'll wait like everyone else and buy it when Tor drops it next year. So I don't know anything about that book. The second book I want to briefly touch on is the new Witcher novel by Andrzej Sapkowski, Crossroad of Ravens. I have fairly high expectations for that book, even though like the Witcher series was kind of hit and miss for me, largely because of Vera's take on it. And at the time of this recording, the book just dropped. I'm not going to be reading it in time for this, but I do have high expectations of it, so I did want to give it a shout out here. And the final book I want to give a shout out to is the 8th book in Kristen Britton's Green Rider series, Falling in the Sea of Stars. And the 7th book really did a good job of snapping the series back to what I really enjoyed about that series, and just delivering a bang of a story. So I'm very, very excited to get to that one and see how the story progresses from there, especially given the teases that we wrapped up that final book with. So those are three releases that came out over the course of these 3 months that I didn't read for one reason or the other. I just wanted to highlight them so no one comes at me in the comments. Anyway, moving on to my actual list. On July 8th, we had Ben Aronovich's Stone and Sky. And this is like the 10th or 11th book at this point in the Peter Grant / Rivers of London series. And the last few entries in this series have honestly been a bit fairly lackluster. This one felt like such a return to form, because this one we kick off a multi-book arc, which is where I feel like Ben Aronovich really shines in terms of what he gets up to. And not just that, this book does some really interesting things where we have essentially dual protagonists coming at the story from two different angles with just two completely different POVs and just their approaches and how they do things, and that kept it really entertaining, really refreshing. So like that worked really well for me, and I'm excited to see where the series goes from here now. Finally, after the last few entries really didn't live up. That was on July 8th. On July 15th, we had Moses Oseotomi's The Memory of the Ogesi, and this just wraps up this trilogy of novellas in just the most brilliant way possible. Like, these novellas really stood out for me as just incredibly creative works of fantasy fiction, especially in recent years with some of the stuff that happened. They're pseudo-African with heavy doses of fairy tale and mythology, and they just have such a mythical feel to them. And the story that they tell, each one is set 500 years apart, like over the span of I guess 1,000 years, you can say, and they followed this pseudo-African tribe and just the events surrounding the history, and these novellas have so many different things to say about history and culture and the way it changes, and the dangers of forgetting where you as a society come from and how you progress in these kind of. It's just really absolutely an enchanting trilogy. The Memory of the Ogesi absolutely wraps it up in brilliant fashion, and these books really, if you haven't read these books before, you really need to read it. They're novellas, they're really short reads, and I promise they're going to be some of the best fantasy you've ever read. Anyway, moving on. On July 29th, we had Rosalia Rodrigo's Beast of Carnival, and this is probably the most ambitious debut novel of the year for me. Like, this draws on the history of the Spanish Caribbean in particular, to give us a really deep and strange tale of slavery, of family, of cultural identity and tradition, and the way that these things, the way that slavery had such a drastic impact on these things. On the enslaved. And this book just does some incredibly things. It's phantasmagoric, it's weird. There's many parts of it that don't make sense, and it doesn't necessarily have to. Like, the characters and the plot and everything are just vehicles meant to be used to really drive home the ideas and the concept that Rosalia Rodrigo wants to delve into. And it was just such a fascinating read from start to finish. Her characters have some incredibly complicated dynamics, because the line the lines are blurred with them. Like there's no particularly good or particularly evil character in here, you can say. They're it did such a good job of portraying some of the messy, like the complicated, through no fault of anyone's, just the complicated way that slavery just completely wrecks families and relationships and these kind of things. So it's just incredibly thought-provoking, a really fascinating book, and definitely one of the best of the year. Absolutely the best debut fantasy novel I've read this year. Very excited to see what else she has in store for us, given this was her first novel. But anyway, moving on. At August 5th, we have the start of a whole new arc in The Legend of the Five Rings. We have the first book of the Clan Wars, written by Julie Kagawa and J.T. Nicholas, and that's A Throne Betrayed. And this book is just, like I said, this book is just a banger of an opening that kicks off the multi-book Clan Wars arc, and it's probably the most exciting thing I've read in the rebooted Legend of the Five Rings universe to date. We get various factions and what happens when the Empire is in a very fragile state, when threats internal and external abound, and what happens when social compacts are destroyed and begin to be questioned by those who buy into them. It's just a really fascinating, really potent story, and it does absolutely draw on some tropes. Like, this book doesn't try to reinvent the wheel in some areas, but at the same time it does have some fun with how it decides to portray those very generic things. So I'm very excited to see where this multi-book arc continues from here. And yeah, that's that one. Moving on August 19th, we have Shirley Jane Anders' Lessons in Magic and Disaster. And this is an absolutely incredible novel of about the complexity of just love and family, with just a queer and all given the queer treatment. Like, the way this book is structured is just brilliant. It's a story within a story within a story within a story. Like, there's so many, the way it's mirrored, and there's so many different levels to what's going on. And then we have this really fascinating main character who's an academic, and it's just a really brilliant story of just how messy family can get and how messy love and relationships can get, all with a tint of magic to it. Just a really engaging, fascinating book. Shirley Jane Anders just writes some incredible fiction, and this book, I personally think this is her best today that I've read, at least. I really only have, in terms of her long form fiction, I really only have a sci-fi book left to read, but I don't see that book topping this one at all. Like, this was just a crazy, incredible ride, with just so much heart to it, and of course so much social context, and just so many different things to talk about when it comes to this one. Like, this book will absolutely keep you up at night just thinking of so many different topics by the time you're done with it. A really great book. Moving on August 26th, we have Anthony Ryan's Born of an Iron Storm. And this is the second entry in his Age of Wrath trilogy, which is a direct sequel to his Covenant of Steel trilogy. So if you haven't read the Covenant of Steel, don't read this trilogy, because it absolutely has spoilers for how that one ends. But this was a solid entry, a solid middle book. It does exactly what the middle book typically does in fantasy, in that it progresses the story in some interesting ways and really just serves to set the characters up for the grand finale, while moving some pieces around the game board and potentially introducing new characters, taking some off the board, that kind of, the wrapping up some minor plot threads, introducing some new ones, the basic stuff. Like, this book doesn't rock any boats or anything like that. It was a solid read, but not much else. Like, it didn't really stand out, and it certainly didn't like wow me the way the first book did. But it was a pretty solid entry, and with the way that everything is positioned and set up here, I have a very strong feeling Anthony Ryan is going to hit it out of the park when he wraps up the trilogy next year. So yeah. Moving on, also on August 26th, we had R.F. Kuang's Catabasis. And R.F. Kuang, one thing you can always count on when you pick up one of her books, it seems, she's going to write an absolutely divisive piece of fiction that is going to have quite a lot going on, quite a lot you can think about, quite a lot you can discuss, and Catabasis is certainly no different from that. Like, this is the story of two grad students who descend into hell to rescue their mentor, because why not? and just the incredible journey they go on as a result of that. And opinions, as with all of R.F. Kuang's books, you know, they get everywhere from roasted to loved, and people trashing it and people holding it up as peak fiction, you name it. And this book is certainly there. At this point, I don't even know what to tell anyone other than, for me personally, I found the story that the book ultimately told to be strangely uplifting. And if you're interested in horror fiction, pick it up. It didn't quite reach the levels of like Babel, which is just one of my favorite things I've read from her. It's just the favorite thing I've read from her so far. It wasn't as incredible as Babel, but it was still really good, and it's much shorter. It's like half the size of Babel, I think. But if you're a fan of horror, it's absolutely worth picking up and reading. And just an interesting book with just so many different things to talk about, as usual. If you're a fan of R.F. Kuang, she does everything that she typically does in her books. Like, it has a strong element of academia to it. It has I hesitate to say dislikable or unlikable MC, because there are some. She certainly skews more towards the unlikable than the likable, but at the same time she's not despicable. But yeah, you know what you sign up for with pretty much any of her books at this point. But yeah, and the final book I want to talk about is KJ Parker's Making History. Like, when this book, the idea behind this book is simple. When a petty tyrant who dreams of empire decides that he needs an excuse to go to war, strange things begin to happen. And this book is just quintessential KJ Parker. It's a novella, first of all, so it's a very short read, and it does everything that KJ Parker is pretty much signature KJ Parker in just such a bite-sized format that's really fun to read. And it does take place within the shared universe that it seems all his auto fiction takes place in, because there are mentions here that you don't need to know what they are, but once you've read some of his other stuff, you can absolutely point out the seed. You can absolutely pick up on the seeds and dimensions here. But like I said, this is quintessential KJ Parker. Just a strange plot, characters who are tropes but behave like anything but. In particular, his type of characters, and just a strange story with a focus on some very niche topics that come and play such an interesting and fascinating role in how the story progresses and all of that. Like. And he does it all in a very efficient page count. And as with all of his books, by the time you're done, you're probably going to know far more about a very esoteric topic than you ever expected to know. But this one in particular had me really thinking about history and the way that we as a society decide what is correct when it comes to history and all of that. It's just a really cool novella from him. And like all of his books, it just made me that much more excited to read more books from him. So yeah, I think that's 8 releases over the last 3 months that I read and enjoyed, along with 3 that I had to shout out so that people don't come at me in the comments. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for this video. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.